Hi, I'm Chris Cordana, and today's talk is going to be about water purification. Before we start, I had a few questions that I just want to have you think about. How complicated is water treatment? Is there a quick and easy way to do this? Is there one-size-fits-all solution? With so many different items to choose from, it's confusing. Aren't these things all pretty much the same? Don't they all pretty much do the same thing? And when I'm asked in my search and rescue pack to have water purification or water treatment, am I just checking a box? Do I just grab something off the shelf, throw it in the pack, check the box, and think I'm good? And then when I actually have to use it, might I wish that I'd actually done something different and chosen something different? And finally, and probably most importantly, can you treat water with any of these things and still get sick? So my goals of this talk are to understand the three key pathogens that we're trying to protect against, and then talk about four main methods of water treatment, and talk about some of the advantages and the disadvantages of each of those systems. Obviously, I want you to know about the four main systems. And then most importantly, at the end of this talk, if there's nothing else that you take away from this talk, I want you to really have a different way of looking at water treatment in terms of having a strategy for most situations. And when I talk about a strategy, I mean being able to choose an appropriate system that you have confidence in and knowing what the holes are or the potential disadvantages of that system are and what your backup plan is. So some scenarios that we're going to think about up front and then come back to at the end: a day hike in the Sierras, travel to an urban setting in a third world country, a backpacking trip on the John Muir Trail or the PCT with a group of 3 people for about a week, a 24-hour SAR pack, and of course a 72-hour SAR pack. So any system that we use to treat water has to be simple, it has to be convenient, it has to be fast, it has to be small, lightweight, it has to be very reliable. Ideally, you can do maintenance on it in the field if needed. It should be cost effective, and it should be flexible, meaning ideally you'd be able to use it for a group or a friend if they didn't have something, and of course you can use it for yourself. So what's the ultimate goal of water treatment? Why treat the water? Well, obviously we want to protect against gastrointestinal illness. In the military, history shows consistently that more troops are lost to what they call NBI, non-battle injury and disease, than to actual death in combat. And the number one cause over the years of non-battle injury and disease is diarrheal illness. So there's 3 main pathogens that we're trying to protect against. The first is parasites. These are the common things that you've probably heard of before, number 1 being Giardia. But there's another one that over the past decade or so has become just as prevalent as Giardia, and very few people know about it, and that's called Cryptosporidium. And Cryptosporidium we'll talk a little bit more about, but it's actually changed the way that we are going to use certain water treatment methods. So parasites is number 1. 2 is bacteria, simple things like E. coli, Salmonella, Shigella, cholera, Campylobacter. And then the 4th is viruses. The classic there being cruise ship virus or norovirus, but there's also hepatitis A, polio, things like that. Generally, viruses are not an issue in the North American wilderness itself if you're far away from where people are. So animals harbor Giardia and parasites. Bacteria can come from both people and animals, but viruses generally come only from humans. But with current explosion, I guess you would say, of humans in the backcountry, how many people watching this talk have, been on a hike, stepped off the trail somewhere, and you see some toilet paper sticking out from under a rock, right? Well, potential vector for viruses. So there's 4 main methods of treating water. The first is the traditional heat, boiling. That works against everything. Kills parasites, kills bacteria, kills viruses. Second, we can use filtering. microfilters, things like some of these things here, right? Different forms of filtering. And filtering essentially takes out parasites and takes care of bacteria, but viruses are generally too tiny and too small, and they'll pass through the filter. And so filtering generally doesn't work against viruses. Then we have chemicals, things like iodine, the traditional years ago kind of thing, and more modern things like chlorine dioxide. One of the most important things from this talk is that iodine is not effective versus cryptosporidium, whereas chlorine dioxide is. And we'll talk a little bit more about that a little later in the talk. And the fourth method is ultraviolet light, something like the SteriPen. Let's talk a little bit about each in a little bit more detail. But before we do, let's talk about silty water. Silty water being water that you can't see through. It's kind of opaque. And the problem with silty water is that if you put chemicals in it, those chemicals are going to be less effective because the chemicals dissolve into particles. If there's already particles in the water, they sort of interfere with those chemicals, and it takes the chemicals a lot longer to treat the water. You can somewhat overcome that by additional contact time with the chemicals, but that means it's a lot longer till you can safely drink the water. What happens to silty water if you put it in a filter? Filter clogs. All filters eventually clog, but silty water is ultimately the early death of a filter, and I've had problems before with some of these filters with clogging. And then ultraviolet light, if we take the SteriPen and we put it in cloudy water, it doesn't work. The water has to be clear to work. So what can happen if we get some cloudy water? Well, we can use a pre-filter. This is a commercial pre-filter. But we can also use something like a bandana or a neckerchief placed over the mouth of a Nalgene bottle. It's slow, but as that water filters through the neckerchief or the cloth, it'll trap the particles and keep it from going into our water. Note that filtering is not treating the water, it's pre-treating the water so that we can use one of the four main methods to treat the water. And then I threw this in only because it usually comes up in a Q&A session and people ask, what about algae? Nothing treats algae. So if you see blue-green algae on still water or red algae, stay away from it. That cannot be removed safely from the water. So let's talk a little bit about heat and boiling. How long do you have to boil water for before it's considered treated? Well, the World Health Organization and the Centers for Disease Control recommend 1 minute of a rolling boil, or if you're at an altitude above 6,500 feet, think Lake Tahoe and above, 3 minutes. The reality is probably 1 minute of a rolling boil is more than sufficient. The problem with heating and boiling is it may not require any extra gear because you're probably already carrying a stove and some sort of container to boil water in, but it's going to take fuel, it's going to take time, and it's very inconvenient. You've got to start the fire, start your stove, boil the water, let it cool to the point you're drinking. It's not something you're going to be able to stop on the side of the trail, get a quick drink of treated water, and move on. It's going to take some time. It's a great emergency backup, but it's probably not your optimal primary method of treating water in the backcountry. The one advantage, too, of boiling is that murky water doesn't impact the effectiveness. So if you've got that nasty, silty water and you just can't filter it, or you don't have a pre-filter and you're kind of stuck trying to treat that murky water, boiling it will actually work, and it kills everything. Chemical methods, we talked a little bit about iodine and why not to use it because it doesn't work versus cryptosporidium. So ideally, I wouldn't like to see this in anyone's kit. And chlorine dioxide, which is another type of chemical treatment, super lightweight. It's inexpensive. The downside is to treat water effectively to kill cryptosporidium with chlorine dioxide takes 4 hours of contact time. So this again is not something that if I'm 3 hours from the trailhead and I've run out of water and there's a nice stream flowing next to me on the side of the trail, and I scoop up some water and throw in one of these tablets, I'm going to be in my car an hour on the way home before I'm able to drink the water. So again, it's probably good as a backup, but it may not be your primary source. Some disadvantages: cold water. Think back to your high school chemistry class. Cold water, increased chemical reaction time. So the colder the water, the longer the time. 4 hours is always the default time on the chlorine dioxide. Sediment decreases its effectiveness. And the thing you really have to be careful on this stuff, there's expiration dates. So what happens to a lot of people is they throw it in the back of their pack. And most of us, most of the time on a typical SAR mission probably aren't using this. 3 years later, the stuff is expired. So you got to be careful about that too. We talked about iodine being ineffective versus cryptosporidium. So because cryptosporidium is just as prevalent as giardia, iodine really shouldn't be used. So how about filters? Filters are our third method. Filters are effective against everything, parasites, bacteria, except for viruses, because viruses are too small and they flow through the filter. All filters eventually clog. The nice thing about filters, there's no expiration date. We've got traditional filters like a mechanical pump. This is nice because there's not a lot of moving parts. There's not a lot that can break. Although if you're not careful with it, the handle can break off. They're kind of bulky. It's a little bit time consuming. The nice thing about this is it's got a little float on it, and so you can pull water from a very shallow source, and you can process a precise amount of water. We've also got a gravity filter, which your dirty, it says right here, the flow goes this way. So your dirty water goes in here, your clean water goes in here. This is nice for processing a large amount of water. These hold 4 liters. It does take some time to filter 4 liters. You need somewhere to hang it. It's very reliable, but it's a little bit harder to fill in a very shallow water source because you have to open this bag and be able to scoop the water into it. Or I suppose you could have something else that you'd use that you would consider contaminated, and you could use it to fill the bag. The one thing that's really important about this, that's a big potential disadvantage, is that these little microfibers that are in the filter can actually freeze. And so if the temperature drops below freezing and you've used your filter and there's water in your filter, that'll freeze at night. Ice crystals will form. They'll break the membrane and it'll look just fine on the outside, but the filter won't work anymore. So you have to be really careful and avoid letting these things freeze. And the same thing goes for the SAR filter. This is a nice little system. I like it a lot. It's very versatile, but the same thing, there's a little micro filter membrane in there, and it's subject to freezing. You can also back flush these filters with a 30 cc syringe, and many of us carry a 30 cc syringe in our first aid kit to wash out wounds, so it's sort of a multi-purpose device that we can use for both. I also like the squeeze filter because it's very lightweight. You scoop the water, pop your filter on, walk down the trail, and you're good. Again, eventually this thing will clog, so you'll start to see a slowing of the water coming out of there. And then unfortunately, when it clogs, it tends to clog very abruptly. And then finally, in terms of filters, I don't have an example here, but people often ask me about what about the straw filters. I'm not a big fan of the straw filter. It's very light, it's very inexpensive, but you need to physically be at the water source. You can't take the water with you. And generally, I guess in a survival situation, sure, we could share a straw filter, but most of the time it's kind of one filter, one person type of a device. The other filter I wanted to talk about is the Grail filter. It filters parasites, just like the other filters, bacteria, and actually viruses. The pores on this thing are incredibly small. It's really nice because you kind of unscrew it and you scoop and go. It's great for international travel. where we have to think about viruses in an urban setting, right? Lots of humans. It's kind of bulky. It's pretty expensive. I think it's somewhere around $100. And then the other thing is, because the filter is so tight to filter out those viruses, it does take a lot of pressure to push the water through, but a nice device. And finally, we have ultraviolet light. This is a Steri pen. It's effective against everything. It's quick. It takes 1 minute to treat a liter. The problem, I think, with this, though, is that this is glass. It comes with a little protective covering for this. But if you drop this and break it, it's completely ineffective. It also takes 4 AA batteries, plus you probably want to have backup batteries. So that's 8 AA batteries. That adds to the weight. And actually, when you weigh it, it comes out to about an equivalent weight to one of these Catadine pumps. It treats about 20 to 40 liters of water on a battery set. Again, it's useless in silty water, and it's kind of tough to produce large quantities of water, right? It does a liter at a time. And something I found on this in the mountains of Colorado during a thunderstorm is that when this got wet, water got into the battery case and it just abruptly stopped working. So I somewhat lost a little bit of faith in this device as a sole device. But I think it's a great device for international travel. If you're in a hotel room somewhere and you need to brush your teeth and the water from the tap isn't safe to use, you simply put that water in an Nalgene bottle, flick this thing on, 1 minute, you've got a liter of water that you can drink at night or brush your teeth, and batteries are easy to find all across the world. So it does have some potential uses. So now that you know the key facts, or key factors I should say, and you know 4 different methods of water treatment, how do we choose which one to do? We need a strategy, and like many things, there's no best one-size-fits-all solution. So how do we approach this? We have to think about the key facts, the background data, the things we went through. We have to think about what threat we're facing, parasites, bacteria, viruses. We have to think about where we are and what those risks might be in terms of those things being present in the water. And then we have to think about what type of system we have and what our system's liabilities are. And we always need a backup plan. The Navy SEALs have a saying, 2 is 1 and 1 is none. So we always, especially for water treatment, we need a backup plan. And I like to think of the strategy as knowing the holes. If I'm going to use my scoop and go Catadine B-Squeeze, when would I not use this? When would it not work? And obviously the answer would be, well, when there's potentially viruses in the system. So let's go through a couple of different examples and then we'll wrap things up. So you're in the North American backcountry. We think generally, unless there's a lot of people traveling through that area, generally a low risk of viruses because there's not a lot of people. So a filter is going to be okay. And our chlorine dioxide is going to be okay. And of course, boiling the water is fine too. So one other thing would be, what if all I brought was my filter of some sort? I had a little package of the chlorine dioxide in my pack just as a backup in case my filter broke or use in an emergency or something like that. And I'm in an area where I don't think there's really a lot of people, so a low risk of viruses. I scoop and I'm about to filter with this, and all of a sudden I see some toilet paper under a rock and some stool. And I think, uh-oh, there's people in the area. There's a threat of viruses. I could actually filter and then throw one of these tabs in to treat the viruses. So sometimes using 2 things could actually work. But that again is an example of knowing where the weakness is for one system and having a strategy to attack the weakness. The second example I was going to do is a third world urban situation. We need to cover viruses, so UV light is a good potential type of thing. Of course, we're in an urban environment, so carrying this thing around isn't really a big deal. My Grail filter is also a great option for something like that because it's scoop and go, and you take the water with you. Of course, we have to think about things like extra batteries. Weight's probably not as much of an issue, and we're in urban environment. There's less risk of tech failure. And we can move on to the third example, which would be a day hike in the Sierra. So a lot of people throw in chemicals in their pack. A lot of people have iodine in their pack. What's going to happen to them? Well, they're probably going to get sick, even if they treat the water. People that use chlorine dioxide, that's great for them, but they're going to have to wait 4 hours. So I kind of like a filter for a day hike in the Sierras. All right, let's wrap this up. So some take-home points. Chlorine dioxide is more effective and it's lighter than iodine, but remember that iodine is useless against cryptosporidium. Boiling water always works with any water type. And don't forget that in an emergency, you can always drink the water and treat later. It takes about 4 to 14 days to actually get sick with Giardia or cryptosporidium. So if you're in a survival situation and you don't have any of this stuff, or this breaks, drink the water. Save yourself, survive, and then we'll treat you down the road. And as nasty as Giardia and cryptosporidium and some of these other things can be, all of them are treatable. Know your system and come up with a strategy based on where you're going. Have a plan. Know why you picked what you picked. And so the final thing I was going to do is just talk about some of those scenarios and what I actually use. So if I go for a day hike in the Sierras, I take my Catadine B-Free. It's lightweight, works great. And then as a backup, I have a package of chlorine dioxide. I suppose if I was more than 4 hours from the trailhead, or I was stuck out overnight and I needed something. Truth be told, I've never actually had to use this, which is good. My Catadine B-Free has clogged on me, but fortunately I've been with a friend, and my friend has had a filter that didn't clog, and I was simply able to use theirs. On the PCT, Pacific Crest Trail, for 2 weeks, I've used the Sawyer filter. I like the Sawyer filter a lot. Most people, or many people, really say that generally this filter takes a long time to clog, and when it does clog, it generally clogs fairly slowly, not abruptly. And as I mentioned earlier, you can back flush it and treat it in the field with that 30 cc syringe. So again, PCT for 2 weeks. I've used the Sawyer. Again, I love the chemicals as a backup, or to think about in a situation where there might be unexpected viruses in the water. My SAR 24-hour pack, I do the same thing as for a Sierra day hike. I have my Catadine B-Free, and I have a package of chlorine dioxide, and I check the expiration date on that once a year. My 72-hour pack for SAR, I do the same thing as my 24-hour SAR pack. And if I'm traveling internationally, I've decided that I didn't want to mess around with batteries and potential glass and droppage. I just bring the Grail filter. Thanks for your time. Enjoy treating your water and be safe.